Okay, so this is chapter 2, business ethics, corporate social responsibility, and sustainability. Defining ethics and the sources of ethical guidance. Ethics is the discipline dealing with what is good and bad, right and wrong, or with moral duty and obligation. We all have our own code of ethics in life, but some are universal, like killing is bad, but some can also be widely debated, like your opinion on protests. The first topic I wanted to discuss is business ethics. This is when people, like CEOs, have the choice to make those right and wrong decisions. For example, Volkswagen developed a so-called clean diesel engine, and they falsely advertised these engines for years as good for the environment by emitting low levels of harmful nitrogen oxides. When this was later proven to be wrong and people realized that they falsely advertised this for profit, the CEO of Volkswagen resigned from his position and numerous engineers were fired. This shows how just because you want to make a profit and make that money fast, you can't say whatever you want about your product and get it. The truth always comes out with these types of business transactions, and things like this are ethically wrong. 67% of investors filled out a survey and said that they would pull their accounts if they found the CEO to be unethical or involved in any unethical behavior, because no one wants to be associated with something like that. The next topic I want to touch on is the sources of ethical guidance. This is simply where you learn what is right or wrong. Some people get their answers from God or reading the Bible, and that is how they defend their choices. Also, how you are raised by your parents plays a big part in your ethical choices, them teaching you what is right or wrong, good or bad. Some ethical guidance comes from laws, like stealing is bad and it's also against the law. We have different codes of ethics and morals, and mostly these choices come from our self-conscious. The third topic I would like to discuss is legislating ethics. Laws cannot mandate ethics. They can create a baseline for ethics for separating the good from the bad. A lot of the current legislation was passed because of the business ethics and breakdowns, and there have been at least 4 attempts to legislate business ethics since the late 1980s. The Procurement Integrity Act was the first attempt. It prohibits the release by government employees of source selection and contractor bid or proposal information. This act applies this restriction to non-government employees who provide consulted services on procurement matters. And finally, a former government employee who served in certain positions on a procurement action or contract more than $10 million is barred from receiving compensation as an employee or consultant from that contractor for 1 year. This act was put in place and passed after there were reports of military contracts for $500 toilet seats and a $5,000 hammer. The Federal Sentencing Guidelines for Organizations Act was the second attempt, which outlines an effective ethics training program and explained the 7 minimum requirements for an effective program to prevent the detect violation. The FSGO promised softer punishments for wayward corporations that already had an ethics program in place. The Corporate and Auditing Accountability, Responsibility, and Transparency Act was the third attempt at legislating business ethics of 2002, which criminalized many corporate acts that were previously relegated to various regulatory structures. Its primary focus is to redress accounting and financial reporting abuses in light of corporate scandals. The Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act was the fourth attempt, signed in 2010. The act was brought on by the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. It became clear that the executive compensation played a major role in the financial services sector, as well in the capital markets following the collapse of investment services firms. The act requires companies that trade stock on public exchanges to comply with several provisions. The first provision requires to stay on pay, giving the company shareholders the right to vote yes or no on executive compensation proposals. The second provision details independence requirements for compensation committee members and their advisors, such as compensation consultants and legal counsel. And the third provision addresses whistleblower protection. Whistleblowers are someone who participates in an activity that is protected. Corporate whistleblowing involves ethics and requires an individual to choose between personal ethics and the status quo. Next, I want to discuss creating an ethical culture and a code of ethics. Culture is concerned with the way people think, which affects the way that they act. Changing an organization's culture requires modifying the common way of thinking of its members. One way for a firm to create and sustain an ethical culture is to audit ethics. An ethical audit is, simply put, a systematic, independent, and documented process for obtaining evidence regarding the status of an organization's ethical culture. It takes a closer look at firms' ethical culture instead of just allowing it to remain unexamined. Ethical culture is made up of factors such as ethical leadership, accountability, and values. A code of ethics establishes the rules that the organization lives by. In businesses, it helps the employees with things like knowing what to do in situations when there's not an exact role for it, and it helps them learn how to behave ethically in different situations as well. There are many kinds of ethical codes, one example being the Society for Human Resources Management. The 6 core provisions in the SHRM Code of Ethics are professional responsibility, professional development, ethical leadership, fairness and justice, conflicts of interest, and the use of information. There is definitely debate on which is more important, an ethical culture or a code of ethics. Some say an ethical culture is more important because emphasizing roles over culture can be detrimental to the organization because employees might seek loopholes to get around the codes, and an ethical culture motivates employees to seek ways to act ethically. Others say that an ethical culture is too vague and should not be relied on to guide ethical behavior. That being said, I challenge everyone watching to think to themselves which they believe to be more important and why. Continuing on to human resource ethics. Human resource ethics is the application of ethical principles to HR relationships and activities. It is vitally important that HR professionals know that the practices that are acceptable and unacceptable and work to ensure that organizational members also have this awareness in dealing with others. Many companies support ethical training within their businesses and for their employees to do better. Ethical training should be a part of a proactive, not a reactive strategy. Regular training builds awareness of common ethical issues and provides employees with better problem-solving tools. KPMG believes that there are 3 fundamental factors in handling ethical issues, which are providing multiple channels for employees to be able to raise alarms, eliminate fear of retaliation for those who raise questions within the company, and ensure consistent investigation and resolution of all matters reported. Ethical training is overall important for companies who care for their employees, which should be all companies and want resolutions within their businesses with little to no problems. Next, Seth is going to talk about corporate social responsibility and sustainability.
Related to ethics are concepts of corporate social responsibility and corporate sustainability. CSR is implied force or felt obligation on managers acting in their official capacity to serve and protect interests of groups other than themselves. I have a 5-minute video that will break down CSR more for us.
Violating consumer and personality rights, or unscrupulous handling of natural resources are only a few examples which notably describe the dark side of our economic activity. By the topics of business ethics, or corporate social responsibility, CSR for short, we want to raise the question, how can CSR be realized in practice? A first, seemingly obvious approach consists in preventing bad practices, such as corruption or fraud. Concrete measures then are often labeled risk management, which is aimed at avoiding financial risks, but also the risk of reputational damage. No one likes bad press, right? As a result, one installs a clear code of conduct in the company, or so-called compliance or value management systems. For example, you can accept a bottle of wine from a supplier, but you have to pass up a golfing trip to Hawaii. However, risk and compliance management are only one aspect of corporate responsibility correctly understood, because CSR is not just about preventing bad practices. The more challenging question is, how can companies contribute to a good society through good business practices? Oh, that's easy, they say. We'll create a charity foundation or donate a lot of money and thus do good. Wrong. That won't hurt and may even help, but it's not systemic change. The important thing is, CSR is about the way in which companies make profits, not about how they spend them. This implies a more integrative perspective, founded on the basis of values and closely related to the company's core business. Good business for a good society sounds fair enough, but how can that work in practice? The following 4 steps can provide us with some insight. First, companies should develop a company mission statement. What is the societal purpose of their business activity? What contribution to society does the company want to accomplish through its business? Which bad practices are not acceptable for the company under any circumstances? This mission statement should first untie itself from a narrow product orientation and rather orient itself towards societal needs. It's not about cars, but about mobility. An insurance company does not sell insurance policies, but helps people managing risks. Such a mission statement should constitute a binding and codified foundation of values for the company. On this basis, and on this basis alone, business activity is performed. Second, it is about identifying social and ecological issues in exchange with the stakeholders of the company, to pay attention, to listen, and to talk to each other. That is important because companies can then move closer towards society again. For systemizing these topics, companies often use the instrument of materiality analysis. Through this, the significance of social and ecological aspects is structured in a simple matrix, from the point of view of the stakeholders as well as from the company's point of view. Corporate social responsibility is not a blueprint, but is rather defined differently from sector to sector and from company to company. However, one does not have to reinvent the wheel entirely, because there are, this is the third point, already some points of orientation in place. For example, the UN Global Compact or the ISO 26000. The Global Compact, for example, contains 10 principles concerned with human rights, labor standards, environmental protection, and anti-corruption. The ISO 26000 distinguishes 7 ranges of topics, with no less than 37 concrete fields of action. Topics here touch human rights, labor practices, environmental protection, and fair business practices, as well as consumer concerns and the integration of companies into society. The 7th topic in the ISO 26000 concerns organizational leadership, which addresses the systematic and strategic dimension of responsibility in the organization. 4th, the concrete implementation of corporate social responsibility then relates to all relevant areas of activity and all departments of a company: procurement, production, research and development, human resources, marketing, sales and distribution, advertisement, and so on. In the field of procurement, for instance, the working conditions of supply firms turn into a criterion for the choice of suppliers. In the area of sales and distribution, there are guidelines for fair consulting services and absolute no-go approaches for contract acquisitions, to name only 2 examples. What sounds relatively complicated at first glance represents an important facilitation on second thought. The implementation of CSR can draw on existing management systems. Through these 4 steps: first, a well-founded mission statement; second, the identification of relevant topics in exchange with the stakeholders; third, the orientation towards general standards; and fourth, the strategic implementation in all departments of the company. Corporate social responsibility is there where it belongs. It is implemented in an integrative way and related to the core business of the company.
On the next slide, we're going to talk about corporate accessibility, meeting the needs without compromising the ability of the future, our future generation meets the needs. Over the past few years, sustainability has reached to include the social, economic, environmental, and cultural systems needed to support an organization, which can continue to both now and in the future. Corporate sustainability is thought as being a business investment so they meet the needs of the shareholders. The way the organization makes decisions can affect the entire business and how these decisions may affect other people working in the company, which is why sustainability should be the fundamental part of business strategy. These environmental sound companies are starting to include in big firms business plans. They're not only for their employees, products, and facilities, but also suppliers and trade partners. Being eco-friendly is a big part of making a company more sustainable. This overall leads to more business and better sales. Many big brands have decided to become more eco-friendly and more responsible with how they handle their waste management. Sustainability has become more very popular with companies operating global. For example, we have Target. Target and their company has made efforts to cut their waste by 70%. And then companies like Home Depot, every wood and lumber sold, they in their store comes from a forest that was sustainable. And then everybody knows about McDonald's trying to go green. McDonald's has done a whole bunch of things to add green stuff into like their products and how they're just trying to be more green. On the next slide, we're going to talk about a social audit. What is a social audit? A social audit is a systematic assessment of a company's activities in terms of the social impact. Companies doing this to restore trust if they have negative like publicity, like in public, they have negative things. They're going to take this audit to show their people that they're better than who they really are. Some of the main topics included in this audit focus on the core values of holding a lot of meaning. These core values include social responsibility, open communication, treatment of employees, and leadership. They are attempts to measure their contribution to various elements of society. Example is companies pushing for pollution control, minority employment and training, and like topics like those. Social audit provides advantages like sharing of the opinions by employees and communities to face challenges by certain marginal and disadvantaged groups. There are 3 types of social audits that are being used. There's a simple inventory of activities, confirmation of social relevance, and determining social impacts. And lastly, Garrett's going to talk about a case study and answer some questions.
Case study number 1. Amber Davies had recently graduated from college with a degree in general business. Amber was quite bright, although her grades did not reflect this. She had thoroughly enjoyed school, dating, playing tennis, and swimming, but found few stimulating academic endeavors. When she graduated, she had not found a job. Her dad was extremely upset when he discovered this and took upon himself to see that Amber became employed. Amber's father, Alan Davis, was the executive vice president of a medium-sized manufacturing firm. One of the people he contacted in seeking employment for Amber was Bill Garbo, the president of another firm in the area. Mr. Garbo purchased many of his firm's supplies from Garbo's company. After telling Bill his problem, Alan was told to send Amber to Bill's office for an interview. Amber went as instructed, but by her father, and before she left Bill's firm, but she was surprised to learn that she had the job in the accounting department. Amber may have been lazy, but she certainly was not stupid. She realized that Bill had hired her because he hoped that his actions would lead to future business from her father's company. Although Amber's work was not challenging, it paid better than other jobs in the accounting department. It did not take long for the employees in the department to discover the reason she had been hired. Amber told them when a difficult job was assigned to Amber, she normally got one of the other employees to do it, implying that Mr. Garbo would be pleased with the person if he or she helped her out. She developed a pattern of coming in late, taking long lunch breaks, and leaving early. When the department manager attempted to reprimand her for these unorthodox activities, Amber would bring up the close relationship that her and her father had with the president of the firm. The department manager was at the end of his ropes. So question number 1. From an ethical standpoint, how would you evaluate the merits of Mr. Garbo's employing Amber? Well, let's do a connection between chapter and case. Ethics is an important component of an organization's culture. In this situation, when Mr. Garbo hires an employee only in hope for more business from the employee's father, pushes the code of ethics aside. A code of ethics establishes the rules of the organization to be lived by. When broken or pushed aside, the ethics culture of the organization is diminished and will hurt the company in the end. Now on to question 1. Mr. Garbo is the president of a firm that made an unethical decision to hire someone who is less qualified and that did not show up to work on time, showed up late, and her grades did not reflect her work ethic in college. But she was hired solely based on her father's connections and hope for a better business. Mr. Garbo was supposed to be the leader of this organization, and by making an unethical decision, he will be hurting the relationship with his employees who have earned their spot in the firm. Question 2. Now that she is employed, what course would you have? What course would you have her on the job behavior? At this point, I would create a 3-strike policy that would be put into place to help ensure that she would pull her weight just like everyone else, and make sure that she comes into meetings all the time, on time, have a great policy, great structure. And then question 3, it may be that Mr. Garbo viewed the hiring of Amber as a strictly as business decision that would ensure receiving continued business from Amber's father. What might be some negative results of this questionable ethics decision?